There is a smell that stops people mid-sentence. It hits you before the first drop even touches the ground. You are walking outside. The sky goes dark. The air changes. And then it happens, this deep, ancient, overwhelmingly familiar scent rolls in like a wave, and something inside you responds to it immediately. Not with thought, not with reason. Something older than thought. Something buried so deep in your biology that it bypasses your conscious mind entirely and goes straight to the part of your brain that deals with memory, emotion, and survival. People describe it differently. Some say it smells like earth. Some say it smells like stone. Some say it smells like something they cannot name but have always known. Poets have written about it for centuries. Soldiers in the field have described it, bringing them to tears. People who have been living in cities for decades say it is the one smell that makes them feel like they are home even if they grew up somewhere they never lived. And here is what makes this genuinely extraordinary. Scientists spent over 100 years not knowing what caused it. The smell of rain is one of the most universally recognized scents on Earth. It crosses every culture, every language, every geography. Ask someone in New York. Ask someone in rural Montana. Ask someone who grew up in the Arizona desert. Every single one of them knows exactly what you mean. And for most of human history, nobody could explain where it came from, what it was made of, or why every human brain on Earth seems to be hardwired to find it deeply, viscerally pleasurable. Until now. And what science has uncovered is more fascinating, more layered, and more connected to the deepest parts of what it means to be human than anyone expected. Let's start at the very beginning. Let's start with what the smell actually is, because it is not one thing. It is not a single molecule. It is not a simple chemical reaction. The smell of rain is a cocktail of at least 3 completely separate chemical phenomena happening simultaneously, each one with its own origin, its own chemistry, and its own story. And each one was discovered by a different team of scientists, decades apart, working on completely unrelated problems. The fact that they all converge into a single, unified sensory experience every time rain falls is either the most elegant coincidence in nature or the most deeply intentional design in the history of life on Earth. Depending on how you think about these things, the first and most important component was discovered in 1964 by 2 Australian scientists named Isabel Baer and Roderick Thomas. They were working at a geological research division in Melbourne, and they became obsessed with a question that their colleagues found slightly embarrassing to take seriously. Why does the ground smell after rain? Not the rain itself, the ground, the rocks, the clay, the ancient dry earth. They collected rocks and minerals from regions that had been in drought. They exposed them to water droplets under controlled conditions. They analyzed the gases that were released, and they found something they had not expected at all. The rocks and clay minerals were not releasing a single chemical. They were releasing a complex mixture of organic compounds that had been trapped in the microscopic pores of the rock surface during dry periods. These compounds were accumulating there continuously, building up during droughts, being deposited by biological processes happening in the soil, and when water hit the surface with force with real impact velocity, it was physically displacing them, forcing them out of their hiding places, launching them into the air as microscopic aerosol droplets. And the primary compound in that mixture, the one that gave it its distinctive character, they named petrichor. From the Greek words petra, meaning stone, and ichor, the fluid that flowed in the veins of the gods in ancient mythology. Stone, blood. They were essentially saying that rain draws blood from stone, and that blood has a smell. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of scientific naming in history. And petrichor is real. It is a measurable, identifiable chemical compound. It is primarily composed of a molecule called geosmin, which we will come back to in detail, combined with plant oils that have been slowly secreted by vegetation during dry periods and absorbed into soil and rock surfaces. During drought, plants produce these oils specifically to inhibit seed germination in conditions too dry for successful growth. The oils leach into the surrounding ground. They bind to mineral surfaces. They accumulate, layer by layer, drought after drought. And then when rain finally arrives and droplets strike the earth with sufficient force, those oils are liberated. They become airborne. Humans evolved to detect a bacterial communication signal that was not intended for them at all. Your nose hijacked the chemical language of soil bacteria. The most universally beloved smell in human experience is something your species learned to eavesdrop on over millions of years of evolution. The bacteria talk to the insects. And somewhere along the line, your ancestors started listening in and found that the conversation was worth following. And then there is one final thing that ties all of this together in a way that is almost too perfect. Geosmin, petrichor, the smell of rain. It is not just detected by humans. Camels in the Sahara have been documented changing direction to move toward the source of geosmin in the air, navigating toward distant rainfall across hundreds of miles of desert. Certain species of migratory birds use geosmin detection as part of their navigation. There is evidence that some large mammals use petrichor as a directional cue during seasonal migrations toward wetter territory. The smell of rain is not a human experience. It is a life experience. It is a signal that has been embedded in the sensory systems of living organisms across hundreds of millions of years of evolution, across species, across continents, across every ecosystem on Earth. Because for every living thing that needs water to survive, which is every living thing that has ever existed, the smell of rain meant one thing. Everything is about to change. The world that was dry is about to become alive again. Whatever you are looking for, water, food, shelter, survival, it is coming. And your brain, built from billions of years of biological history, learned to love that message before it ever learned anything else. That is the smell of air that has been torn apart and reassembled by forces powerful enough to match the surface temperature of the sun. The third component is simpler but equally important. It is the smell of the rain itself, or more accurately, the smell of what the rain liberates as it falls through the air. Raindrops are not pure water. As they form and fall through the atmosphere, they collect particles, dust, pollen, microbial spores, industrial chemicals, sea salt, aerosols if you are near a coast, organic compounds from vegetation. Each raindrop is essentially a tiny liquid sample of the atmosphere through which it has traveled. And when those drops hit a dry surface pavement, soil, stone, concrete, they create what physicists call Worthington jets. The impact of the raindrop on a surface generates a high-speed jet of tiny aerosol droplets that shoots upward from the impact point. These droplets are 1,000 times smaller than the raindrop that created them. They hang suspended in the air. They carry with them every compound the raindrop collected as it fell. They carry geosmin liberated from the soil. They carry plant oils. They carry whatever biological and chemical material was on the surface they hit. And in a heavy rain with thousands of drops hitting every square meter of surface every second, the air becomes saturated with this aerosol. A fine, invisible mist of every scent component of rain, suspended at nose height, delivered directly to your olfactory receptors. The smell of rain, at its most intense, is not coming from the rain. It is coming from the ground. It is being shot upward by the impact of the rain on the earth, and it reaches you from below, carried on a current of aerosol that the rain itself has created. Now we get to the most important question. You understand what the smell is made of. You understand why humans evolved to detect it at extraordinary sensitivity. But why does it feel the way it feels? Why does the smell of rain not just register as information the way the smell of plastic or motor oil registers as information, but produce this deep, almost emotional physical response? Why do people describe it as comforting? Why do psychologists and neuroscientists who study olfaction describe the smell of rain as one of the most universally positive scent experiences in the human population? The answer lies in the way olfactory information is processed differently from every other sense in your body. Every other sense you have, sight, hearing, touch, taste, all route their signals through a brain structure called the thalamus first. The thalamus is the brain's relay station. It receives sensory input, processes it, categorizes it, and then passes it on to the relevant cortical areas for conscious perception, and to the limbic system for emotional processing. The thalamus creates a slight delay between sensation and emotional response. But smell does not route through the thalamus. Olfactory signals travel from the receptors in your nose directly to the olfactory bulb, which connects directly to the amygdala and the hippocampus, the brain's emotional processing center and memory consolidation center with no relay station in between. This is why smell is the sense most powerfully connected to memory and emotion. This is why a smell can trigger a memory so vivid and so emotionally loaded that it stops you physically. This is why the smell of your grandmother's kitchen or an old classroom can transport you backward in time more completely than a photograph. Smells bypass the cortex. They go straight to the ancient parts of the brain that process emotion and memory before any conscious thought occurs. And geosmin, with your nose tuned to detect it at 5 parts per trillion, built into your olfactory system by millions of years of natural selection, associated across hundreds of thousands of generations with survival and water, and the transformation of hostile landscape into livable one. Geosmin hits the amygdala and hippocampus, loaded with the deepest evolutionary significance of any molecule your nose encounters. The pleasure response it triggers is not aesthetic. It is not cultural. It is not learned. It is ancient biological reward, signaling for the detection of something your species spent millions of years depending on for survival. There is also a more recent discovery that adds another layer to this story. Researchers studying geosmin found that it does not just smell pleasant to humans, it actively attracts them. In 2020, a study using high-speed cameras and microscopy showed that Streptomyces soil bacteria actually package geosmin into specialized spores and release it specifically as an attractant for springtails, the tiny soil insects that help disperse the spores across wider territory. The bacteria are essentially perfuming themselves to attract their transport vehicles. And this means that geosmin did not evolve primarily as a signal for humans. They reach your nose, and your brain, which has been processing that combination of chemicals for tens of thousands of years, recognizes it immediately as something deeply significant. But geosmin is the star. Geosmin is the molecule you actually smell, and geosmin has a story that is almost unbelievable. It is produced by soil bacteria called Streptomyces, a genus of bacteria so ancient, so widespread, and so biologically successful that they exist in virtually every soil sample ever taken from every location on Earth. Streptomyces are the most chemically productive organisms in the known biological world. They produce the majority of natural antibiotics that medicine has been built on, including streptomycin. They live in soil. They break down organic matter. They are fundamental to the nutrient cycles that make plant life possible, and as a byproduct of their metabolism, they continuously produce geosmin. Geosmin is a sesquiterpene, a complex organic molecule. With the chemical formula C12H220, it has a distinctive three-dimensional structure that fits perfectly into specific olfactory receptors in the human nose. And here is the number that should stop you in your tracks. The human nose can detect geosmin at concentrations as low as 5 parts per trillion. 5 parts per trillion. That is roughly equivalent to being able to smell a single drop of this chemical dissolved in 200 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The human nose is not just sensitive to geosmin, it is extraordinarily, almost incomprehensibly sensitive to it. More sensitive to geosmin than almost any other molecule known. More sensitive than sophisticated laboratory equipment. More sensitive than virtually any other smell you can name. And this extreme sensitivity is not an accident. It is not random variation in human biology. The fact that your nose is tuned to this specific molecule at this specific threshold of sensitivity is, almost certainly, the product of millions of years of natural selection. Think about what that means. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, our ancestors were not living in cities with grocery stores and indoor plumbing. They were hunter-gatherers in landscapes where rain was not a romantic atmospheric event. Rain was survival. Rain meant water sources were refilling. Rain meant vegetation would grow. Rain meant prey animals would move. Rain meant that dry, cracked ground where nothing grew was about to transform into a landscape that could sustain human life. The ability to smell geosmin, to smell the presence of soil bacteria and the earth oils that signal recent or incoming rainfall at concentrations of 5 parts per trillion was not a luxury. It was a navigational system. It was a survival radar. The humans who could smell it from the farthest distance, who could detect it the earliest, who responded to it the most immediately, those were the humans who found water, found food, found viable territory first. Those were the humans who survived and reproduced. The extreme sensitivity of your nose to geosmin is the residue of millions of years of selection pressure. Every time you catch that smell before a storm and feel something shift inside you, you are experiencing a biological reflex that kept your ancestors alive. Now let's talk about the second component of the smell of rain, because geosmin and plant oils are only part of the story. There is another smell that accompanies rainstorms, particularly electrical storms, and it is entirely different in its chemistry and its origin. You know this smell. It is sharp, metallic, clean. It has an almost electric quality to it, which is appropriate because it actually is electric. This smell is ozone, and it is produced by lightning. Lightning is not just a discharge of electricity. It is an extraordinarily powerful discharge. A single bolt of lightning reaches temperatures around 30,000 Kelvin, which is roughly 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. And at that temperature, the electrical energy is strong enough to split oxygen molecules apart. Atmospheric oxygen exists as O2 oxygen atoms bonded together. When a lightning bolt passes through air, the energy of the discharge breaks those O2 molecules apart into individual oxygen atoms. These free oxygen atoms are extremely reactive. They immediately bond with other O2 molecule and the surrounding air to form O3, a 3-atom oxygen molecule. Ozone. Ozone has a sharp, clean, slightly metallic smell that the human nose detects at concentrations of around 10 parts per billion. It drifts downward from the upper atmosphere, where lightning strikes before a storm arrives. And it is frequently the very first thing you smell before rain, even before a single drop has fallen, before petrichor has been released, because ozone travels ahead of the storm on the downdrafts of wind that precede it. That sharp, clean electric smell before a storm, that is the smell of shattered molecules.